some misconceptions about the technology to underrepresented groups, and want to thank both of them for joining us this morning. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
So,
Good morning.
Sam and John, it's great to see you. Sam, want to start with you. Before we get into what the implications are for society in a sort of broader way, I do want to talk to you a little bit about what took place at the meeting yesterday and what your personal takeaway was from the understanding or not that folks in the White House and folks in Washington have about this technology.
Look, our mission is to figure out how to build these advanced AI systems and deploy them into society for maximum benefit, and that requires partnership with government and regulation. The companies can do a lot, and we talked about this yesterday, to get that started, but long term we will need governments, our government, governments around the world, to act and to put regulation in place and standards in place that make sure that we get as much of the good as possible from these technologies and minimize the downsides. So the meeting was about that. I think it was a great start. Lots more to do.
You've been talking, perhaps surprising to some, about the need for regulation, especially long-term. But what's the distinction in your mind between whatever that long-term regulation looks like, and I'd love to know what you think it should look like, and to the degree that there's going to be regulation in the shorter term, if you think that there is, what that will be or should be, and the challenges it may pose?
In the shorter term, I think there's a lot of issues that people are now discussing. Provenance of content is a good example and a big one, right? Like, how are we going to know what content is real, is generated, is from a human? You need to know that you're talking to a human or an AI. When it's one or the other, I think you should. So there's a class of things about that. And then longer term, as these systems become really, really powerful, I do think we will need some sort of international authority that is looking at the people building the most powerful systems and making sure that we are running evaluations for safety, getting external audits and red teaming, and sort of tracking what's happening. We do this for other very powerful technologies. I think AI will need to be one too.
Okay, but given how fast things are moving and how fast you're developing this technology, how much time do we actually have?
I think it's sort of like it's a spectrum. It's not like, we're fine and then all of a sudden we need to have like this strong regulation in place. I think we need to start thinking about the issues now, and then over the next period of many years, we'll need to put increasingly rigorous regulation in place.
John, you've been spending a lot of time thinking about underprivileged, underserved markets, underserved people, and the implications on jobs and things of that sort. And I'm curious where you think AI really is going to land. We were actually talking about this just earlier this week, that actually in an odd way, it may be that blue-collar jobs actually become, more valuable, oddly enough.
Maybe certain blue-collar jobs. I can run you through certain occupations that may be at less risk than others. We talked about that last night here in Atlanta. We got into some level of detail. But I think there's no avoiding that this is what I call the third reconstruction. I've said it on your show before. It's a fourth industrial revolution. It's this was like going from mankind to horses, and probably more appropriately from horses, the transition to automobiles, which took 50 years to complete. This is probably going to happen in 5 years, Andrew, and it's going to disrupt the lives of 100 million working families, between now and 2030. And if we do it right, there'll be another 100 million or plus jobs that come in, and we'll train them properly. If we do it wrong, it won't just be black and brown people who have pain. It'll be my poor white brothers and sisters. This is like Dr. King all over again in the civil rights movement, where he talked to all of God's children about what I call the color green. Last night was probably one of the most important meetings I hosted ever. Because of the implications. I'm very hopeful because a guy like Sam is on point, and Sam called me and said, let's do this meeting. It wasn't my idea, it was his. We had talked about it, but he took the initiative. To go from the White House to our house was quite dramatic.
Sam, you've been working on this on ChatGPT on one end, but also talking about the need for universal basic income on the other. How intertwined are those two ideas?
Somewhat, but I think it's important to say that although I think universal basic income is an interesting policy and well worth exploring, it is only a partial solution. I think people will still need all of the other reasons that they work, and there will be plenty of jobs and all sorts of new ways we spend our time, new ways we create value for each other. I think human desire for feeling useful and status and differentiation and making incredible new things and creating is not going to go anywhere, no matter what technology we develop. But I think if we can eliminate poverty with a better policy than we have now, and if we have a new way to share the tremendous wealth we're all about to create, I'm very interested in that. Right. I just don't think it's the whole solution. I do think they're intertwined.
Hey, Sam, what did you think when you saw that Elon Musk had signed that letter saying that there should be a 6-month sort of pause or moratorium on the development of AI?
Well, I don't think the letter called for a pause on development. It called for a pause in one direction of development, which is sort of scaling up the biggest models. I understand where people who sign that are coming from, and I understand the very real cause for anxiety about the speed with which things are moving. But I think that in particular is an unnuanced policy. And what we should talk about instead is what sort of evals and practices and systems and technology development do we need in place to ensure continued safety.
One of the reasons I asked is because, of course, he co-founded this with you and now seems to be on the other side competing with you, right?
Yeah, as far as I understand it.
So what is that relationship like now?
Fine. I mean, people do this stuff, sort of.
So,
this
Sam,
is like the way of the tech.
I have anxiety about near-term concerns with AI, which we talk about in our right before our face. But I also just can't help myself think years in advance, and not necessarily to the singularity, but when machines become really, really, really powerful, and we don't really understand at that point what might happen. And you've seen some of the end of humanity type fears that have been expressed by some pretty smart people. Could we build in a safeguard to make sure 20, 30, 40 years from now that humans aren't completely superfluous to machines? Is that something that you've thought about? I mean, I've read some science fiction. Yeah. Is it impossible?
I mean, the reason that we started this effort is because of these questions. I think getting this right, figuring out this society, the new society that we want to build, how we're going to integrate this technology is, I think, one of the most important questions of our time. And I'm very happy to be here with John starting this tour because figuring out how we want to build this for people that are not just sort of the people in the Bay Area, figuring out what people want this new world to look like, how the technology should work, how we should set the rules around it, how we want to use it, how we do the thing that works for the people of the world as a whole. Figuring that out now is really important. We can decide anything we want. We collectively, society, not we OpenAI. There will be regulation. There will be many different versions of this that work, and we will have in the coming years a very rigorous discussion about how we're going to integrate this technology into our lives. And we can build in all sorts of safeguards. We can build in all sorts of rules. But if we don't have this discussion with a very broad group of people, we will build something that a small slice of humanity wants rather than what humanity as a whole wants.
Hey,
John,
Andrew.
Yes, go ahead.
I was about to say that, look, you mentioned a name that's been, observant of what Sam's doing. I think if they were doing it themselves, they would probably trust themselves to do it now. And I trust Sam to do it now. I think there's a little competitive envy going on here, which is to be expected. Sam has something that a lot of tech leaders don't have. I say this very respectfully. He's got IQ and EQ. Some leaders have a blind spot called people. And we're not human doings, we're human beings, which is really what Joe was referring to. We're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. Energy and people matter. And if we don't do this exactly right, we're not listening to the right people in the right ways, we will win the battle and lose the war. We do this right, and we push the whole, really, civilization forward. We have to bring everybody with us. I think that Sam's the only tech leader I'm aware of that went into the underserved community ever with a new technology like this, to listen and not just talk and say, help me make this better, almost like a moral bill of rights, which is what this is. We probably need that as much as we need regulation.
Right.
And I think that this community can help him do that.
Hey, Sam, a question, because I think it's one on the top of minds of probably every business leader. I'm sure you get it all the time, which is how to protect their own data in this context of AI. I think you and Greg have often talked about, in a perfect world, you'd be able to train off of all the data in the world. And in fact, you wouldn't want it to be siloed, to actually make this technology as smart and as great as ultimately have the potential that we all talk about for it to have. In a way, you'd want to have access to everything. But right now, you have a world where every business is looking to try to figure out how can they secure their data and to put it into these silos. And I'm curious if you could talk about sort of those two ideas, which ultimately are at odds.
Look, the way the world of developing new technology works is you have your beautiful idea in the vacuum about how you'd like things to go, and then you get the kind of cold, hard contact with reality, and whatever customers want, you have to figure out how to do. Customers clearly want us not to train on their data, so we've changed our plans. We will not do that. We don't train on any API data at all. We haven't for a while, but now we've made it an official policy. And, there's plenty of other data to get out there. So, yeah, I think we did have this dream of we'd be able to train on as much data as possible. That's not going to happen. That's totally fine. And we're developing new technology to need less data.
Do you think that data and content becomes more valuable over time or less valuable over time? Barry Diller, who's been a guest on this program many a times, has talked about the idea of banding news organizations together, for example, to sue, to prevent effectively the training on their content, thinking that this could be sort of a revolution that would undermine the news industry, which of course has been challenged over the years before. But I'm sort of curious how you think about that, because in a perfect world, it is something that you'd probably want to be able to train on, the archive of the New York Times and NBC News and Time Magazine and People Magazine and all of it.
We don't want to train on anyone's data who doesn't want us to train on their data. A lot of people do, to be clear. A lot of people are like, please get this in the model. I want this represented. I want the model to know this. So there's like a lot of people who reach out saying, please train on my data. But as you pointed out, plenty of people who say don't. And of course, we will respect that. I think the way to understand these models is a reasoning engine first, not a database, not something that's meant to just memorize a bunch of people's data. So these models will have general purpose reasoning capability, and then they'll be able to go out and search for data on the internet or access it if you want, or if everyone gives the right permission and if there's a business model that makes sense. So I think the picture of the future is just going to be a little bit different, where we build these models on data that people are happy to train on, and then they can access out to other data when everybody wants, the user, the data owner, everything there.
It's a longer conversation, gentlemen, but it's a super important one. We hope we can continue it with both of you. Sam and John, I want to thank you for joining us. Wish you well with this listening tour, or more than that, around the country, and hope to see you guys soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. We're hitting the clock.